Well, welcome to all of our podcast and YouTube listeners, both loyal and those tuning in for the first time, because you're listening to the 14th episode of Moving into the Unknown. So this podcast explores human potential and the connections between the sensory body, the cognitive mind, and our emotions. So really since June 2020, Heidi Carroll, Dale Dickens and myself, Libby Murray, have travelled a journey of discovery and learning. So looking back at all of our previous episodes, I think we're really proud that they're all still relevant today. They're still current, as is Feldenkrais in today's environment. So this is Libby speaking, and today Heidi and I warmly welcome body language expert Lavinia Plonka with her unique expertise. And Lavinia has, for over 35 years, helped people to improve their movement, behaviour, relationships and careers. So we do want to be able to give you some idea of what Feldenkrais is, if you haven't come across Feldenkrais before. And if you do have questions about your own functioning, then Lavinia is a person who is well known for being able to connect the dots between or amongst our posture and movement, and between emotions and the mind. So Lavinia is really an ideal guest for our podcast. So if you are really curious about yourself, we are curious about Lavinia and sort of the intersection of all Lavinia's training and professional career, which if I just would like to mention, has included theatre, dance, yoga, some martial arts, and Lavinia has taught the Feldenkrais Method for over 27 years and is an assistant trainer as well. Lavinia is a level CL4 teacher of the ALBA method and emotional body instructor. So I'd like to hear about that. I'm not sure what that is exactly. And Lavinia was an artist in residence for the Guggenheim Museum, which is, that's extremely an auspicious position to have had, I think, and a movement consultant for theatre and television companies around the world. Lavinia's popular workshops, current workshops, explore the intersections we've been speaking about: movement, emotions, and the mind. And Lavinia is currently the director of Asheville Movement Centre in Asheville. And which state in the US is that, Lavinia?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. Being from Australia, yeah, I don't recognise the initials. So Lavinia is also a faculty member of the Shift Network and the author of several books and audio titles as well, and several books which I'm very interested in unpacking. So What Are You Afraid Of? The little book of well, we might get to those in the podcast. I think the biggest one is the bestseller, What Are You Afraid Of? Which has been translated into 5 languages. So that's a really big question, Lavinia. What are you afraid of? So for people listening in, I guess 2 questions really. What made you ask that question, and when did these questions first start coming for you? You know, when did the connections and the integration of everything you've done in your life start to form into a Feldenkrais sort of sphere? So I guess I'm interested firstly in where it began for you. I think that's a consistent thing we've asked. What was the first influence on you that led you into Feldenkrais?
Well, how far back do you want me to go? I was sitting here going, I was born, but movement has always been the most important thing, the most interesting thing for me. I was joking a little bit, but like any middle-class child, I had music lessons and I had dancing lessons. And my parents had to constantly beg me to practice my accordion, but they never once had to ask me to practice my dancing. I never wanted to stop dancing. And that continued and led to my first life, my first career, where I ended up becoming a mime, a performer, a physical comedian. I studied clown. I did a whole lot of very unique things that involved calling myself a physical actor, perhaps you could say. And that was an interesting process because I managed to somehow, first of all, carve a niche in a field that was a little bit unusual and be successful at it, in spite of the fact that I didn't get any support from my family. So here I was fighting my way to the top and feeling at the same time like I was a failure. And that led to chronic back pain. And nobody could find anything wrong. They did the x-rays. They told me I had lumbago, which basically translated means back pain. It was no help at all. And while I was in the chiropractor's office one time, there was a magazine there that had an interview with this guy, Moshe Feldenkrais. And I started reading it, and he's talking about parasitic habits, the habits that we develop to survive as a child, and the postures we develop and how they get a grip on us. And then we have tension and we have pain. And I'm reading this and I'm going, he's telling my life story. This is my life story. And so that was the beginning, really, for me, was that seminal moment of hearing the words Moshe Feldenkrais. I'd never heard of him before, even though, of course, as it happens, and I'm sure that it's happened to you, where you've never heard of anything, and then the minute you hear of it, everywhere you turn, there it was. And so it was only a matter of months before I stumbled upon the fact that there was going to be a Feldenkrais training in New York, which was not far from where I lived. And I just went for it. It never once occurred to me that I was going to become a Feldenkrais teacher. I did that because I wanted to get rid of my back pain and be the best performer I could be. I looked at all of his writing through the lens of my emotional life and my life as a performer. I had no idea that there was such a thing, for example, as functional integration, which is the work we do one-on-one. I never saw it in any of the books. And so when I got to my training, it was like, what? I thought this was for actors. So, it took a couple of years of really reorganizing myself. And in the process of reorganizing myself, I began to realize that the work of self-realization, which is really one of the reasons that I went into the theater, it wasn't because I wanted to be a movie star. It was because I really wanted to communicate with people. I wanted to change the world through my mime pieces. I know that sounds very chaotic, but that's what my thoughts were. And then I realized that I could be so much more useful helping other people find the same pleasure, joy, relaxation, and functionality that I had discovered. So I shifted. And it was not an easy shift, but I shifted.
It's a great word, functionality, and how Feldenkrais can help people move towards function. And so the interconnections, I suppose, when you mention the emotions, that was like one of the primary things that was sort of driving you. Has that stayed with you? Because I'm curious about the Alba method and the work that I think you'd done up until the point you entered the Feldenkrais training. You had done a lot of work in the acting field, and the Alba method, that does connect emotions, doesn't it?
It does. And, like I said, for me, emotions and expression of emotions were key, right? As a mime, you have to express emotions without even being able to speak, most of the time. So I was absolutely mesmerized with studying people. You know, why does this person look sad? Why does this person look arrogant? You know, and then I would take those characters on, but I didn't really understand the science at all. And I was always interested, of course, in my own emotional life and how I was channeling my own emotions. So I did a lot of research through the years. I studied a lot of things, the work of Francois Delsarte and his method of expressing emotions and things like that. And when I came across the ALBA method, I became very interested because it's a scientific approach to looking at different emotional expressions. And so I first studied that with a wonderful teacher, Laura Bond. And in the process of working with her, she discovered that the Feldenkrais method is incredibly useful for helping people learn these emotional effector patterns that were developed by the scientist Susanna Block. And so we formed something, it's really her thing, the emotional body, but I teach with her, and we use Feldenkrais and other somatic kind of sensory experiences to help people get grounded in the expression of these emotional effector patterns. So we've kind of broken off from ALBA, and that's what the emotional body is. Laura is originally, of course, a master ALBA teacher, the level C5 or whatever, and she went to Chile and studied with Susanna Block, who is the scientist. And so I have her knowledge, and then she's integrating my knowledge, and we've put it together into a system where even though she's training people in the patterns, they always also get this kind of nurturing, safe learning environment that was created in our Feldenkrais training as well. That was one of the big differences, because a lot of acting training in the past, and I could go on and on about this, was you know, pushing people and stressing people and making them perform. And she was seeing how that actually created a kind of toxic atmosphere and stress in the performer themselves. And when she started studying Feldenkrais with me, she was like, well, this is a whole new way, a much better way to actually learn how to embody these emotions, because you're not having the layer of stress on top of everything. So we've continued working along that path. So that's one of the things that I do when I work with her, teaching these emotional body things. But she also teaches emotional body on her own, and then, you know, uses her other somatic processes that she has developed over the years.
So is it, sorry, Heidi, go.
So when you're talking about almost embodying these different emotions, how does that then translate into real life? So if I'm able to do what you're, you know, doing your course, how does that sort of empower my world?
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. It's incredible, because once you begin to understand, it's just like, you know, Feldenkrais always says, if you know what you're doing, you can do what you want, right? So if you know that your breathing has just changed because your boss walked in the room and you're starting to shrink, or you see your husband coming in and you really don't want to tell him how angry you are, you have these tools because you're recognizing which pattern you're going into. Every emotion has a breath,
Right.
a breath rhythm, right? Facial expressions and postures. And so when you begin to understand what they are, you actually have resources. Just like for us as Feldenkrais practitioners, when we recognize, oh, my shoulders are up by my ears, I can try some strategies to bring that back into a functional place. You can do the same thing with your emotions. I've used the emotional effector patterns for myself. First of all, I use them every single time I'm going to do a podcast.
Right.
Because by giving myself the breathing pattern of neutrality, or of, you know, calm tenderness, then I'm able to be more present to a person than if I'm sitting there going, okay, it's going to work. It's going to work. I can do this. Right. And if I feel that panic rising, I can give myself that other breath. If I'm in a difficult situation and I change my breathing pattern, that person, you know, we know about entrainment, right? That person will start to change their breathing and we'll be able to hear each other better. And I mean, really the uses, the practical applications are pretty endless as far as I'm concerned.
That sounds amazing. It just sounds so, and I love the way that in your Feldenkrais, obviously big history, that you're not just sticking to, obviously you were introduced to Feldenkrais through pain. However, you've really delved into lots of other different elements, and this is obviously emotion. So can you talk to us about some other interesting aspects that you've traveled down to see what else with the Feldenkrais lens? Like, for example, I know you've done some work with chakras, you've done some work with emotions, yeah, lots of other different things.
And I love that you used the word lens, because that's exactly the way I describe what I do. Because for me, and again, the Feldenkrais method was not just, eventually it became not just about the pain. And that's really, really important. And I think that that was really what Dr. Feldenkrais was hoping, was that through understanding yourself mentally, physically, and emotionally, that you would become a fully realized being, a more fully realized being. And you would be able to, and he often said, put the work in your own handwriting. I don't, you know, he didn't want little Moshes running around. He wanted people to take this work and apply it to, you know, construction work and offices. And, you know, he wanted it everywhere. And my sort of other self, there's always been a piece of me that has just always been really, really interested in the mysteries of the planet, you know, mythology and spiritual searches and the esoteric traditions of things. You know, one of my, this is one of these true confessions. One of the things I used to do when I was a performer, one time I had an agent who happened to know that one of my hobbies was reading tarot cards. And it was truly a hobby. It was just something I did for pleasure. And one night she called me and she's like, our tarot card reader is sick. Could you go and read cards for this party, for this event? And I was like, I can't do that. I can't do that. And then she's like, please, please, you know, so I put a scarf around my head and earrings and called myself Madame Lavinia, you know, and I went there with the cards, and it turned out to be so successful that they started wanting to have me do this all the time. So my interests have always been about that. I studied yoga. I started studying yoga when I was 18, and it was a part of my daily practice for many, many years. And yoga is not just about the physical. There's the meditation process. I've had a meditation practice for 35 years. So how do I divorce all of those things from myself as a Feldenkrais practitioner? To me, the awareness through movement lessons cry out for, how does this relate to one's study of the heart chakra? How does this help me feel my root? How does this connect with, you know, Del Sartre's trinity of body, mind, spirit? You know, I mean, to me, I was just constantly feeling all of these connections. And so, and also, you know, I didn't really think of myself in the beginning, especially as a particularly skilled functional integration person. My skill was really as a communicator. And so the way to kind of build a practice, to build a following, was to take what I knew, what I was good at, and integrate it with Feldenkrais Awareness Through Movement lessons, which make everybody feel better. And so that was my original strategy, was looking at the things that I'm fascinated with. You know, you mentioned some of the other things like the archetypes, I was thinking about it before. The first time I taught a workshop on the archetypes was 2004. And it was a completely different experience and workshop than what I just recently completed for the shift, because over the course of the last 18 years, my studies, my process, my understanding of both the Feldenkrais method as well as my relationship to the study of archetypes has continued to evolve and grow and develop. And so I guess I've just been doing this forever. But I think it's really important for Feldenkrais students and Feldenkrais practitioners to realize that you don't have to follow a certain orthodox pattern in order to be a successful Feldenkrais teacher. You think outside of the box and think about what you love. And then you put what you love with the Feldenkrais method, which you love, and it all comes together. It really does. It really does.
Yeah, it sounds, Lavinia, just the breadth and depth of the exploration and the journey that you've been on. It just really highlights, I think, that the questions that we ask ourselves in an awareness through movement lesson don't only have to relate to that back pain we have or that sore knee, or it can also, it's in the questioning, is that it? The questions we ask ourselves in that. So it's about our functioning, our effective functioning, and our exploration of ourselves in that way.
And allowing yourself to do what you love. I mean, there are other practitioners. I don't know, is it okay if I talk about other people who have stepped outside the box as well?
Yeah.
You know, for example, there's a practitioner in the Northwest of the United States, Annie Tho. Do you know of her work?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Her passion is for nature. She does things like, a whole workshop on fly like a bird, or, and that is where she speaks from. And that is why people connect with her, because she's speaking from her authentic self and not trying to imitate or parrot somebody else. In the beginning, we all parrot. I mean, when I first started doing my first functional integration lessons, and I had this person on my table, and I'm looking at their head, and I just sat there and I went, just pretend you're Russell Delman. Just pretend you're Russell. Just go ahead, you can do it. And that was how I would do it. I would pretend I was him, just as if it was a mime piece, except I was performing as Russell. But after a while, you become yourself. You find who you are.
And I guess that's said for, I suppose, clients who come along to Feldenkrais exploring, isn't it? We find that people really do find who they are. It's an exploration of self. And I'm just thinking it's of the way you organize yourself, the way you can transform. You may be wanting to improve range of movement at joints, or reduce pain, but you can also, it's also really about, I suppose, increasing our capacity for life, really, and the way we live our lives with the minimum of effort and maximum efficiency. And I think people who get a taste of this really, as we've found, it can become a lifelong passion in itself, can't it?
I love what you just said, and it's so true. I mean, 90% of my new students and clients come because of the pain point, right? But then they start to make these discoveries, and they'll say to me, well, if it wasn't for Feldenkrais, I would have never thought of this, or I would have never gone in this direction. And that's just so awesome. They showed up with a frozen shoulder and they left with a brand new painting that they had never thought they would be able to do, or whatever. That process is so exciting to me.
I guess sort of it's in the uncovering, isn't it? In the unfolding of that, and in the recognition. I'm hearing that you do help people recognize some of these archetypes, which are, would you say they're our personal traits, our attributes, or are they the masks that we put on ourselves? that maybe sort of hide our real selves from our more effective functioning?
Well, so there's so many different definitions for an archetype. And there are so many different approaches that people have taken. You know, Jung's archetypes are sort of psychological archetypes. He's got the wheel of 12, sort of personality archetypes, for lack of a better word. Carolyn Mace has 100 and something archetypes, and that we're always moving from one archetype to another archetype. There's so many. I mean, if you just Google archetypes, you'll see organizational companies that work with that. And I'm not working that way in that sense. And it could change again. I don't want to say that anything I do is the way I'm going to be doing it for the rest of my life. But what I've been attracted to for the last several years are these 4 archetypes that are, as far as I'm concerned, they're more like meta archetypes. They're ideals. They are what every human carries within them. And within that, just those 4, we have, and this is the way I call it, we have the kryptonite. I don't know, are you familiar with Superman and the idea of kryptonite? Okay, because I remember I was talking to some people from another country, and they were like, what mineral? That's not on the elemental chart, you know. So the kryptonite and the superpower and the shadow of each archetype. But I just stick with the 4 because there's so much there for now. There are definitely aspects of personality that don't necessarily fit in with those archetypes. But the reason I chose those 4 is because those 4, for me, reflect the way I want to show up in the world, the way the highest possibility for myself in the world. And I'll tell you who they are. It's not a secret. But and here's what I think is really interesting about it, because they're the warrior archetype, the teacher, the healer, and the visionary. And as I was working with this, all of a sudden I thought to myself, oh my God, that's Moshe Feldenkrais.
Is that in the way that
You're a healer and a visionary? And he certainly had his kryptonite and his shadow that related to all of those things. But when you think of a meta archetype, there it was. And so that's what I work with right now. And I'm sure that over the course of years, I'll expand myself to other things like the mother and all that. But there's a lot in there already that's worth studying.
And just I'm hearing that the bringing of that knowledge is helpful to you as a practitioner in that you can help people through their own exploration of their gestures, or however their expression of themselves comes out in one of those archetypes. If they're uncovering habits, it might be that these habits are working for them, or maybe these are the things that are their shadow, the things that are not working, and that when people can see these things, then they have the opportunity to change or to choose to do something differently, which is very Feldenkrais, isn't it?
Well, what I was going to say, and that's where the beauty of the Feldenkrais method comes in, right? Because our movement habits are where we are ingrained. You can read all the most wonderful books about changing your archetype and uncovering and recognizing and identifying, but you're still carrying the same body language, the same you, the same habits, the same sabotaging behaviors. But through awareness through movement lessons, you begin to start to reorganize yourself to be the best of the warrior or the best of the teacher, or at least begin to move towards your aspirations as a visionary, because you're using movement and your awareness of how you use movement to reprogram yourself. Because you can talk to yourself till the cows come home and it's not going to change you, but to actually learn to embody this. And that to me is what's so exciting about awareness through movement, because there are so many lessons that link to the behavior or the carriage of these 4 archetypes. I've actually identified what I call 4 centers of presence in these archetypes, that each of these has a center of presence, and that I take the awareness through movement lessons from that center of presence. So the warrior is the pelvis, the grounding, the root of the self, right? The teacher is the chest, the heart, the lungs, how you listen, how you respond, give and receive. The healer is the hands, and how it comes from the heart through the hands and the energy through the hands. And then of course the visionary is the eyes. So then you take the awareness through, look at you're going, oh, I know a lesson that would that. So it's so beautiful, isn't it?
It is so beautiful. That was just such a, because I think as you were talking, I'm saying, okay, we've got these ATM classic lessons of, moving your shoulder also gently and sensing into it. And then you're presenting these ideas of archetypes and chakras. And I guess for me, I really wasn't sure how you marry these two. But as you're saying that, so once you physically put them in your body and then explore them from that point, it just sounds like an amazing experience.
I mean, just, every Feldenkrais practitioner knows that classic lesson of, some people call it the Errol Flynn lesson or the ringing of the arms lesson, right? Where we're rolling our arms and you're lifting your pelvis, and eventually your chest is opening up, and your chest. I mean, this is the teacher, and then it manifests out through the hands. I mean, so that's what I do. I sit there and I go, okay, how can I take this principle or this idea of this particular archetype and then translate it into an awareness through movement lesson? And it's been great fun, actually. The course I taught recently, it was really interesting because it was a mixture of public.
Yeah.
And then there were Feldenkrais practitioners in there lurking, part of the course. Only a couple of them ever spoke up, but there were people there who were going, yeah, I can do this. Yeah. I can explore this. And I thought that was great. But what I feel is really, really important is that I don't, in my archetype workshop, ever have people try to figure out what's my archetype. Am I more of a warrior? I'm more, and people want to do that. Often, people will start their question with, I'm not really a warrior type or whatever.
Yes.
And as we unfold it, we realize we all carry all of that because we all have a pelvis. We all breathe, right? Yeah. So we have these energies in us in different ways.
So I was going to ask who was coming to your workshop. So it is a mix of people new to Feldenkrais and also people who know your body of work. And just that it is still exploratory though. And you did clarify that point, that you're not trying to label people. We're not trying to judge people. We're not trying to, we're not trying to put things upon people. It's more about, so you're still in a Feldenkrais process of uncovering and having people discover for themselves what they can see.
Everything at this point in my life, it feels like everything I do is based on the Feldenkrais method. But, you earlier, you mentioned my book, What Are You Afraid Of?
Yes, I was going to mention that now. What are you afraid of? It could be anything. Yeah.
Right. But if you go through the book as a Feldenkrais practitioner, you'll see that what the book really is a giant awareness through movement lesson. Each thing builds on the next thing until you're doing something that you thought was impossible in the beginning of the book. And so I look at so many things from the point of view of there's something impossible. I start with a scan. I begin slowly. I stay safe. I try different approximations. I'm not afraid to fail. And believe me, I have failed quite a few times. And, and then eventually I learn something new. So to me, that works for everything. I think the structure, and the other thing that I feel because of my life in the theater is that every awareness through movement lesson is kind of like a piece of theater. If you think about, there's the opening, right? And then there's the build, and then there's the climax or whatever, and then there's the denouement where you sense how you've changed, right? I even sometimes in my classes when I teach, you know how there's so many lessons where at the end you do some crazy variation. And I call it the Feldenkrais Finale. I'll say, all right, everybody, it's time for the Feldenkrais Finale. And you know,
A big reveal.
but it feels to me, it's like a piece of theater, really.
Yes.
Participatory theater, which is the best kind.
And a theater where whichever you're doing, your archetypes or whichever lesson you're doing, what I'm hearing from you is that you're doing this sort of a bit of revealing, but understanding yourself a bit more. And whether that's something that might be in, you know, other people perceive as a weakness or a strength, they're still held in this same beautiful way that it's not necessarily you're, you know, coming up and trying to change something really strongly to the positive. It's just being this safe, you know, aspect of just holding it and not judging it and just moving through it, as opposed to, you know, this is bad, this is good type thing.
Well, we know, I hope so anyway, that we can't really tell what is bad and what is good, right? Because you change one thing, you change everything.
Yeah.
And maybe the bad, what other people might call a bad thing, is something that you needed to do to survive.
Yeah.
And you know, I know you know this, but it's
but
really about just feeling safe in yourself to explore other options.
That's lovely. It's that moment by moment way of being and exploring. And I wanted to ask you, Lavinia, when you mentioned, you know, feeling safe, the other book, one of the little books you wrote was The Little Book of Falling, brackets, and Getting Up. And that book has been described as elegant, and which is really intriguing. Yeah, I saw that written, that it's described as elegant, because what can be graceful about what can be graceful? I wonder if you can explain what can be graceful about falling, and where was the inspiration for that, writing that book?
Well, the inspiration came because I live in a town where there are a lot of elderly people. And there were people who were coming to me because they had injured themselves falling. So that was the beginning of the process of my curiosity about how can the Feldenkrais method be helpful for people who are afraid of falling. Again, what are you afraid of? I'm afraid of falling, you know, and of course, falling is and I have a TED talk about this, but you know, it is the ultimate falling and failing, right? When we fall and can't get up, that is it's humiliating, it's embarrassing, and it's also debilitating. And Feldenkrais often talked about that if you're not afraid of falling, if you know you have reversibility, if you know you can recover, then you're not so afraid of falling. And of course, if we're able to move in a way where we have resilience and flexibility, we're less prone to fall. So all of these little pieces were coming together. And at some point, and I don't even remember when it was anymore, I taught a workshop on falling, and it was great fun. And somebody went, "You should write a book about this." So that's really where it evolved. And then after I wrote the book, I also created the audio program, which is slightly different than the book. It has longer lessons. The book is really like a teaser to get people interested in the Feldenkrais method and see a few strategies. But my emphasis, and you know this as Feldenkrais practitioners, that you don't start by teaching people how to fall. You start by teaching people how to get up. Start by teaching people how to be comfortable with, as I call it, falling from the floor. They start on the floor and then they change orientation. they start to make friends with the floor. And through that process, they learn how to be less afraid of falling and how to fall well. And I can't tell you how many times students of mine have come into class and guess what? I fell on the ice yesterday. And I'll be like, are you okay? And they'll be like, yeah. I mean, I laid there for a minute and went, am I okay? And yeah, I was okay. Because the work they had done through awareness through movement had allowed them to find a way to fall that was not as damaging. We're going to fall. And so one of the things that really bothers me a lot in the medical establishment culture is that they're all about fall prevention. And they're trying to make it a good thing that you don't fall. And the fact is that people fall no matter how hard they try. So why not give them resources?
I love that word, resources. And, we had Russell Delman speak to us on this. And your metaphor about falling and getting up and just brings up connotations of resilience. And we've had Molly Tipping speak to us on emotional reversibility. So there we are. We've almost come, you almost come full circle back to in the way you've integrated the emotional aspect of our lives into this, because that title, what are you afraid of? And the little book of falling, they're just so enticing. And I think great for people if you're looking about investigating what Feldenkrais is all about, because they sound very practical. You've got some tools in there for people to look at. Yeah.
I mean, I try to make what I write fun to read, because if it's too esoteric, we already have an esoteric name. We already have an indescribable practice. So if we can find a hook for people to go, oh, I can relate to this. I have fear, or I'm interested in body language, or my mother's afraid of falling, then we've got a place where we can meet. And I think that's really, really important, is to try to meet. And again, this is not new information. Feldenkrais said it 1,000 times. You meet the person where they are. And, you don't try to impose your view on the person. And I would say that one of the most important things of all is to listen to what this person is saying, not just their words, but how they're using their words, what their face is saying. I was recently, a couple of times actually, this has happened, where I've worked with people and they would tell me something tragic or traumatic and then go, ha, ha, and they would try to diminish the story by having this nervous laugh that came after it. And they didn't even know they were doing it. They didn't even know. And through the process of helping them start to see that they were using the laughter in a defense, in a process of protection for themselves, they began to open up and see that they can speak about this in a different way and be freer, a lot freer. So that's just one example where they could tell me the story, but I'm hearing something else going on underneath it.
And so it's almost like the art of the Feldenkrais practitioner is to really see the person, that seeing is in how we take on board everything about that person, the gesture, the posture, the emotion, the movement. I just recall part of our training, we watched a video about Marina Abramovich, who's a performance artist you might know, and it was about seeing and in how she sat. I think it was in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and she sat, and that's what she did. She sat, and people filed in. People, you can Google this. People filed in and just sat opposite her across a little table, and just it's fascinating to watch just what happens when we just sort of even just sit without even touching. I wonder if you want to speak to that, because we do use touch in Feldenkrais. Awareness through movement lessons are done on the floor. There's no touching involved. There's some verbal guidance by a Feldenkrais teacher. And then functional integration, there is some touch involved, but not always.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that so? Yeah. So,
part of what you're talking about is that presence, and that in being so present with someone else and seeing exactly where they're at, then that's almost giving them permission to do that for themselves. Mm-hmm. Would you agree, Lavinia?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As you were speaking, both of you, I was also thinking about Carl Rogers. Are you familiar with his work? Right. And the whole idea of active listening, right? That through that process of just listening, not trying to respond, but just listening, opens up their ability to listen to themselves, just as you said that. And then you can add touch. And sometimes the touch is so simple, but the person is so now attuned to what is happening that I tease them sometimes. I'll say, you just gave yourself your own lesson. I didn't have to do anything, I touched your forehead and we went that way. And then, they recognized what was happening. And a few moments later, it was completely different. And I didn't do anything. They reorganized themselves through their own expanded attention, because we are attention. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is that what we are is attention. There was a beautiful saying by a philosopher who said that, we've all heard where attention goes, energy flows. That's a saying, right? But he actually said, you are attention. And if you have no attention, you do not exist. And I just thought that was so powerful, because that means that, those times where I get up in the morning and I'm sort of making coffee and the coffee beans fall in, there's nobody home. There's it's just a machine making coffee. There's not a human being there. It's when I bring my attention to something, that's when I'm alive.
And then it's through their Feldenkrais practice that you hone in your attention, your ability to focus, and then expand.
Right. And if I'm paying attention in that way, I don't have to be afraid. Like so many times Feldenkrais practitioners tell me that, they're afraid. They're afraid they're not going to be good enough. Yeah. They're afraid that they don't know enough. They're afraid. But really, if you let yourself sit in that place of presence that you just described, there's nothing to be afraid of, because you're going to do what's necessary and nothing extra.
And that the same goes for any person just being the client, in an ATM or an FI, that it's just creating this safe enough environment that you can be completely present with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
To that process.
It's kind of that, giving oneself the time and space to give enough attention to just see, see where you are at. And I suppose look at both your inner world as well as your outer world. And when Lavinia, when you bring the emotions into it, that's about, what's apparent to other people and what's apparent within us, within our body and our somatic reactions, but also in how we relate to the people around us and our environment. So it's pretty all-encompassing, can have effects far and wide.
It's interesting what you're bringing up, because, we talk in Feldenkrais about proprioception and our ability to sense ourselves in space and our limbs and all that. And of course, there's also interoception, which is what you're speaking about right now. And in my research, I came across a paper where they studied different people, and the people who had the more developed interoceptive skills were more functional as people as well. So it was very interesting. They showed that when a person is able to go inside and sense themselves, they make more reasoned decisions. They're more able to communicate. It was fascinating. It was a really interesting study. I know you're going to ask me where it is. I'm going to have to go dig it up again.
Because that's
Very
brilliant.
good.
I think that's been part of my own process. I keep asking, you know, I can sense myself better through doing this practice. And I keep asking, so what's that giving me? But I love that there's some science to actually, to bring, I know that in myself, but there is some science there to back it up. So can you tell us, Lavinia, I mean, obviously your world, you can't not be in the Feldenkrais lens, but I guess can you summarize, or can you, I don't know what Feldenkrais has given you?
I can't even imagine what I would be like if I hadn't discovered to me, on some level, you know, like when I said when I discovered it, and then I would start telling my friends in the theater about it, and my friends who are massage there, and they were all like, oh yeah, Feldenkrais, I've known about that for years. Or, oh yeah, a friend of mine was at Amherst, and and it was like not ever there for me. And I feel like it, you know, if we have divine guidance or some universal force or wisdom that's telling you where you need to go, I feel like my life was directed towards discovering that at that moment in my life, in order to help me bring it all together. Yeah. All of my life experiences that I had as a performer, as you know, as a child that had a difficult childhood, I don't need to go into details. All of that came together to help me become the person that I am today. My spiritual quest, everything. It's like, you know, it seemed so random at the time. That's what I'm trying to get to. So many times people go, I don't know what my trajectory is. I don't know where I'm going to end up. And so I'm looking at it from the other end of my life going, it all makes sense. It all comes together, and you realize that you use everything. But for me, the Feldenkrais lens was what afforded me the ability to pull all of these disparate parts of myself into one whole through movement. And so you know, my life is now as it was when I was a child. I love movement.
I love that. Thank you, Lavinia. That sort of parallels my own experience with Feldenkrais, and just the word integrating, the fact that we call it functional integration, you know, just how telling those words are. You know, there's the integration, and then, as Heidi said, you know, to take it into function. And that what I've learned, one of the things I've learned is that we don't have to throw out those parts of ourselves that are less functional. We can grow and learn from those. And as we uncover that was a huge revelation for me, not to have to think that I had to press something down or repress something or forget. Not that we forget. Our, you know, brain is a complex thing, and, you know, we are our experience and from our experience. So, but we don't have to be stuck in it. And yeah, I love the idea that you've embraced all those parts of yourself across your life from childhood through to reach this point of integration. It's quite delightful. Yeah.
And I feel like it gives then anyone who hasn't done Feldenkrais, was not familiar, it's then permission to come into it as themselves and just keep going as themselves, rather than it having to be a particular way. I guess we talked about yoga a bit earlier, that in yoga classes, sometimes you come to yoga and you're trying to copy the teacher, and you're trying to think, I need to do this particular pose and, you know, lose this weight or whatever. But that none of those elements are there when you're speaking about Feldenkrais in this way, which it, yeah. I just love that. I just think that it gives everyone permission to be themselves and go on their own journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I do think that there are yoga teachers now that are embracing that approach as well in some ways. I think that this idea that Moshe Feldenkrais brought is, again, it can be applied to everything.
Yeah.
It can be applied to everything.
Yeah. That sounds wonderful. I'm really excited that we've got to talk to you today. It was amazing. Libby and I were a bit nervous because we've just known the extent of your work and how much you have contributed to the Feldenkrais community. And as new people are into the practitioner type realm, it's giving us permission to do something, to go on our own journey, which I think is lovely. So thank you,
It's
Lavinia.
funny for you to say that, because I don't really, I feel like, really? Did people think that?
Yeah,
So,
very much
it's
so.
so sweet. Thank you. You've made my day. My head is getting really big now.
I guess it's just that, I mean, obviously the time that you've done Feldenkrais for such a long time, and then the breadth of, you know, the physical getting up and down off the floor, as well as going to archetypes. It's just such a beautiful experience to actually understand where you've gone and to now talk to you.
Well, thank you. It was absolutely an honor and a pleasure. I feel, you know, when I saw the list of the luminaries that you had interviewed, and I was like, they want to talk to me? How cool is that? Well, thank you. It was really fun. It was
thank you so much. So Lavinia can be contacted mainly through her website. So that's Lavinia, Lavinia Plonka, Plonka.com. And you've got, again, a myriad of things. There's classes online, in person, there's workshops, there's private lessons, courses, you've got retreats. And you've obviously got that expansive, you know, through the emotions, the gestures, archetypes, the chakras, just amazing. So we've been really honored to have you today. You've gone from, started out as a mime, and then going on this self-realization journey. You've helping then realize that helping other people find pleasure, joy, and functionality was really where this your life as a Feldenkrais practitioner began, and then giving people to emotionally express themselves. And I love that you're identified that true confessions of what you've talked to us today about, and identifying that falling is not failing, that it really is a part of life, because whatever we're doing, making mistakes and getting back up again is really how our life gets interesting and exciting. And then we finished off with our attention and how significant that is. And then where we can hold our attention, then it opens up this amazing journey of our own self and how we can explore the world. So thank you again, Lavinia. And it's been wonderful. And thank you. Thanks, Lavinia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lavinia.
Thank you.